This isn't a video against Christians, more so just a take on cognitive dissonance, other known as having a belief in doing a completely different action. Because it happens much more often than we imagine. I use religion as an example because religious people are some of the most hypocritical, right? But since I've studied the majority of the religions, I'll be taking things from all of them. But let's start out with virtue signaling over true virtue. Politicians would be an ever so glaring example. They claim one religion or they claim to do one thing and then they do the complete opposite. And it's because it's not in their true nature. I don't really believe there's people who are truly of their certain following all that often, because I've noticed quite frequently that people will say, oh, I'm this religion, but then they don't follow it. And they don't even know their own scripture. So it's just like, are you really your own religion or are you not? I think a lot of people do it for a status signal more than anything, which is actually probably pretty evil in scripture terms, I would imagine, right? And the short-sightedness of all this really comes through when you look at the example in the title, the slave that created the cross necklace. Because a lot of the stuff is cheap junk, right? And it's made by slaves, that's why it's cheap. And so the short-sightedness of this whole nature is that people buy this thinking they're signaling a good thing. A Christian might wear a cross necklace thinking they're signaling the virtues of Christ. But instead, what actually happened is they just funded slavery in the world. And they probably put money in the pocket of a slave master, which is, I don't think that's what Christ would support personally, but maybe I'm wrong. And so this is the exact reason I don't pick a specific religion myself, because I find to pick a single religion to be a limitation in thought and a straight shoot to cognitive dissonance, because you can't always follow your religion to the T. I mean, if you really did, and you should really read some of these scriptures if you really want to follow the religions, because you might be surprised what you come to find in them. But then that's where the scapegoat fallacy comes around with Christianity specifically. And I have to say Christianity specifically because they are the ones that do this. So in Christianity, you don't actually need to be a good Christian. It's not necessary because a lot of times your sins are forgiven by default. So it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you accept Christ. And I think that is a really dangerous mentality. I think it's the exact reason people like, what was his name? Jeffrey Dahmer became baptized in prison and then got his head bashed in by a weight, because clearly I don't think God's very happy with his attempt to find redemption. Obviously, it might be a different story, but I don't know. And at the truth of the matter, I think you're better off trying to be like Christ than to be a Christian. And so you can take that as you want. You can take it as a positive or a negative, but I'm going to stray away from the Christianity critiques and antics a little bit here because that's not actually my intention of discussion here. So the reality of it is the blind evil of the unaware. This is the plague of our generation. And most people don't realize because that's it right there. It's the plague of the unaware, and the majority are unaware. And what are they unaware of? They're unaware of their actions and consequences. They do not piece together what action A does to consequence Z. So, for example, hooking up can have multiple consequences down the line, right? You hook up with someone, you could accidentally have a child. That trauma is going to be into a broken household, and that broken household is going to destroy that kid, and that kid's going to create another generation of broken kids. And that one decision led to a whole chain of broken people. And I think that's how we got where we are today, because there's so many broken people because this chain has been going on for quite a long time now. And so that's just one element of it. There's another element. You could casually do your thing and you could catch a disease and you could give that disease to your future wife, right? And then your future wife dies of cervix cancer because of your decide to get some cheap dopamine. People, when they do these actions, don't inherently think they're evil, but it's because they're unaware and they're blind and they don't see how the beginning action leads to the end consequence until the end consequence hits them in the face. And even then, they might not even see it. But it's not only just that single case situation. I think a good example of this is money. Money is often the biggest fundamental mover of the world and the mover of change. Money makes the world go round, right? Like it or not. And so think about it this way, right? All the money that is spent on religious purposes could be used for much greater reasoning. And hear me out, because this might be where I lose some of you, but the global faith economy is multiple trillions of dollars a year, okay? To solve world hunger would be maybe 100 billion at max a year. And so if you took just a small portion of this religious funding and put it towards world hunger, you would solve world hunger. And I know someone's going to hit me with like, oh, but the government should solve world hunger with their taxes. Well, guess what? The government's evil. Are religious people evil? I don't think they're supposed to be. So maybe religious people should consider slowing down on their religious spending and speed up their spending on actually creating some real solutions to problems in this world. And I think that's what your religious figures would want. Maybe not the ones you see in charge, but your true religious figures, your prophets and your messiahs and your God or gods, whatever you say, right? I think that's what they prefer to see. I don't think they would want to see you buy some cheap cross necklaces off some Chinese website, or some like cross earrings or something, or get a cross tattoo, even though in the Bible it literally says don't mark your body, but just saying. I know I might sometimes sound a little bit aggressive, or maybe to a certain degree critiquing or assaultive in my vocabulary and words around certain things, but I say this because for me, my biggest problem in the world is dissonance and people doing things that are actually in direct confliction with what they say they want to do or what they want to be. And the more I've gone down this path of getting awareness and truth, I've come to realize that everyone is delusional, including me, A delusion is a natural byproduct of human existence because let me explain a really complex topic here, but it's not that complex, but it takes a lot of abstract thinking. So, human existence is delusion. You do not have a self-identity without delusion. And why do I say this? I say this for one reason and one reason only. If you removed all your conditioning, your culture, your experiences, your influences growing up, you would be a blank slate. You'd be the ultimate truth. Now, if you did that to every single person, we would all be the exact same. We would all be in absolute truth. And so that points to one thing. Our personality forms from these external influences throughout time. The reason I am a free thinker is because I've had problems with authority my whole life. And when you have problems with authority, you end up becoming an individualistic thinker. The external influenced me to think for myself. So I'm still controlled by the external to the certain degree that my thought process formed to be anti-establishment. And so I'm biased too, because experience itself is biased. And so what I'm very much trying to explain to you guys here is that self-identity is delusion. Have a self, have a bias, have a delusion. I hope that makes sense to you guys. Also, one last thing before I move on to the next thing, even though the next thing would be a perfect transition from this point, I think it should be mentioned. When I say if you cut down religious spending and you solve world hunger instead, that'd be great. And don't use like the government taxes as an example. I say this specifically because I see this a lot. I'll use hookup culture again because it's such a thing that's so prevalent in conversation and all that. Girls will say, oh, but guys do it, so we can. Just because one thing does it doesn't make another thing okay. I don't know why we have this whole idea, and I'm not even saying a specific gender. I don't know why I have to specify this. It's just an example. But just because there's one bad doesn't make another bad okay. Like, two negatives don't make a right, or two wrongs don't make a right. We've all heard that saying, right? It's very true, and I don't know why we seem to forget that one. Anyways, what I was going to pivot to was the egoic nature of the self-identity symbols that we wear. The cross necklace would be one of those self-identity egoic nature symbols. And I say this for the exact reason I explained earlier. To have a self-identity is to have an egoic structure. Your ego is your self-identity. And so to be a Christian is to be identifying with that. Jesus Christ was not a Christian. And I don't say that in a way to provoke, and I don't say that like that in any degree. I say it because it's the reality. The Christians are the followers of Jesus Christ, but Jesus Christ himself was not a Christian. And if I haven't said it yet, I should really probably say it. I have no problem with Christianity. I think if everyone was a Christian, the world would be a completely better place. I also think the world would be a much better place if people were open-minded to everything in regards to moral prosperity. But honestly, most people struggle with that. It's the exact reason I promote marriage, because I'm not pro-marriage, but I am pro what marriage comes with. And I mean the responsibility of waiting towards marriage. I think people need guidelines to live properly. It scares me a lot. I see this often where, okay, let me use a different example. Let me use Muslims. I've noticed that there's Muslims who drink alcohol. They're not supposed to be doing that, but they do it anyways. And the reason they do this is because they're hypocritical. They don't actually follow their religion. But since it's their identity, you cannot convince them otherwise. And this is, okay, let me explain a structure too that's really very powerful, but you have to understand it to know where I'm coming from. So there's a structure of identity, of changing your reality, right? So we're going to go to, okay, we've hit Christianity, we've hit Muslims, and let's hit the New Age now, right? New Age thinking has this concept of the self, the reality shifting. And so in the reality shifting technique, there is this idea of order. You need to change your identity, but let me explain the tiers of what you need to get to identity. So I'm going to organize this from the strength of reality shifting identity to the weakest. Okay, follow me here quick because this is going to get a little complicated. So the strongest form of identity shifting is the identity itself. The one after that, the weaker one, would be your worldviews, your world models. And then even weaker after that is your beliefs. Weaker after that, thoughts and emotion. And then weaker after that, action. Action being the lowest form of shifting your reality. And so, where I'm going with this is that you have these religious people. They're born into this religion most of the time. That's why they follow it. The majority of people follow what they're born into. No thought of anything outside of it quite often, but not always the case. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Besides the point. The point I'm making here is that identity is the strongest fundamental key to your reality. Religious people have their religion as their identity, and they'll protect that identity at all costs. That's the ego. That's why you see people being delusional, because they're protecting their ego. And religious people are ego based. And I don't say this to be critical. I say this because self identity is ego, and being religious is a self identity. It's an identifier. You don't say, let me put it this way. Okay. When someone says this, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, what is the key subject of the matter? They say, I am this. They are identifying as it. It's their identifier. Okay. And in the Bible, what does God say his name is when asked? During the burning acacia bush. No, during the burning acacia bush, the question is asked to God, what is your name? And God answered, I am. And so there you go. Self-identifier as the key to reality shifting. At least if you want to compare religious scripture to New Age terminology. But I do believe that's a strong case, and you'll never convince someone who has an identity. Okay? I'm a firm believer of that. If someone has a belief deep enough as an identity, you're done. You will never convince them otherwise unless you spend exposed amounts of time with them over long periods of time, destructing every single thought they have and constantly showing them contradictions, because enough contradictions might break them, but it's not my point. Anyways, I hope that made sense, because that's actually really, it'll help you understand a lot of what I'm talking about a lot more when you realize the structures of the self, because the self is exactly how marketing preys on you, right? Marketing preys on the concept of you. And you might not fully understand what that means, but look at a medicine commercial, right? You know, what does a medicine commercial show you? It shows you happy families. It shows you happy couples. What does a commercial about a gym, right? What does it show you? It shows you getting in shape. It shows you all these things. It sells you a dream, right? Every single time they sell you what is your solution to your problem, right? And they have to convince you of one, you have a problem. You the person, you the identity, you have a problem with your identity, and you need to change it. And the only way to change it is with our product. You see a fast food billboard. Your problem, you're hungry. Boom. They gave you a solution. It's easy, it's cheap, it's quick. Convenience is the solution. Convenience is the solution to people's problems. The path of least resistance is how human nature works. The brain works on dopamine loops. You give them the dopamine, they'll repeat the pattern. And these self-rewarding systems are the ones that prevail and often show through to being the biggest thing to happen. Why was religion so big back in the day? Because societal reinforcement made it a dopamine loop. The community did it, and if you didn't do it, you'd be alienated, ostracized, so on. But if you did it, you'd be rewarded with conversation, human interaction, which all produces dopamine. You might even be rewarded with a good life because everyone did it, right? And so I think that's a great thing. I really do. Even though I'm not pro-structured religion, I think structured religion has its benefits for the masses. I don't think the masses are capable of holding personal morals without structure. Like I said, the hypocritical nature of religious people shows through because they're not actually following their religion. They're stuck in a structure. I've noticed this a lot with people who come from rigid backgrounds. Looking at immigrants, for example. Immigrants are a very good example because you find an immigrant that comes from a strong Muslim country, right? And they have these Muslim beliefs, but then they go to a Western country. And suddenly they start running into the influences of that Western country. And suddenly their religion loses its value. And so the structure at hand is often what shapes the people. It's not a fundamental internal belief. It's an internal fluidity towards what's surrounding you in your environment. A true internal structure is not environmentally dependent. And you'll see this with a lot of different people. They behave different person per person. I personally behave the same with everyone I talk to, whether they like it or not, I suppose. And so this internal fluidity is actually really quite detrimental because it's shape-shifting. It's egoic mask, and they're wearing a mask for different environments. On one end, they might be the good Christian. On the other end, they might be a party girl or a party guy because it's not gender-based, okay, guys? And so the overarching themes of reaching to the depths of hell is pretty much consumerism, because consumerism is a race to the bottom. We have, sorry if you can hear that, that is a motorcycle. That's one of the benefits of being in a third world country, a lot of loud noises. One of the big things of consumerism is that it's a race towards the bottom. Who can make it the cheapest? Who can make it the fastest? And so speed and cheapness lead to two things: quality drop and slavery. And then if you really want to go even deeper, we have these negative evil patterns in consumerism now where you buy a product, but there's ads inside it. You buy a product, but it has a subscription for it, like the crazy printers that require a subscription out there nowadays. How that's a thing, I don't know. But eventually, consumerism leads straight to hell to the most greedy people possible. The only people who are willing to get to the top are the people who are willing to stomp on others. You do not get excessively rich like that without stomping on others, without taking advantage of others. And that's a reality. And I think it's important to realize why people miss these points, because I think I've come to the solution of why this is the case, or the obvious answer. Not so obvious answer, actually, because I just figured it out. So it couldn't have been too obvious because I think way too much if you can't tell by now. And actually, let's be completely truthful here. I didn't figure it out. I heard someone else point it out, and it actually made a lot of sense. So, but yet again, that's everything in your brain. Your brain's just a mix of influences, so every thought you've had is not really that original. Let's be fair. So to point this out, we're going to use the Myers-Briggs personality test. So there's this trait. It's the second letter in the personality title. That trait is one of two things. It's sensing or intuitive. And the difference between these two traits are pretty simplistic. It's one of the traits that have the biggest divide in numbers. I think the ratio is about 76 to 24%. And 76 of the population, or 76% of the population is sensing, and 24% of the population is intuitive. And what does that actually entail? So to put it simply, sensing people see what's in front of them. They see what's exactly in front of them. They think point A, point B, right? They don't think connections between all of them, you know? If you show them things on the table, right? They will see, like, okay, let's say you have five things on the table, right? You have 5 fruits. You know, they'll see, okay, apple, banana, strawberry, cantaloupe, and grapes. But the other person will see the connection of their indigenous region they come from. They'll see the connection of their color, of their origin, or of the origination of the trees or from the ground. And they'll see these different connections throughout all the fields. But the regular person will look at it and see it for what it is. Well, the other person will see it for how it's connected. And so the difference is the people who can see how things are connected start seeing greater patterns in the systems of the world. You know, they see that greed pulls down the world because of certain influences, and that power is absolutely corrupting because the only people interested in power are weak. And so, you know, I'm using specific examples, but that's kind of irrelevant. Just ranting on that a little bit. But what it does show is that the people who are pattern seeking, intuitive, to be specific, they see more. And the people who are not like that will struggle to see it. Not that they're incapable of seeing it, but they'll struggle to see it because they can't connect the dots the way the intuitive does. And honestly, it's not a bad thing. I honestly think living as an intuitive person is crippling in its own way. For one, it makes you a little bit socially incompetent because you would communicate with people and you'll say one thing to another and people don't follow you. And so that creates its own issues, and it's not always socially appropriate, I guess, but it is a tool for intelligence, I believe. It gives you a greater sight. And so majority of the population sees what's right in front of them. And that's how people miss certain things like corruption and stuff like that until it's obviously so in your face that you can't ignore it, like the whole files that we all know about. So in your face, you can't ignore it because it's right in front of them. Point A, point B, right? Well, the people who think in patterns might have seen it way before. And so this thinking process of A to B, you know, let me use a really simple example and not use the fruit analogy because that just complicates it. Let's say you have 5 points. They're all separate. You know, the sensor sees all 5 points as separate. The intuitive sees them as all connected. Simple as that. And so where this actually leads to is multiple different things. Thought prisons, for one. A thought prison being a certain structure of belief that you get stuck in and nothing outside of this. I've had this conversation with someone the other day. This might be a little out there for you guys, but we'll find out. So I was telling him how I don't believe all entities to be evil. And Christians, they generally see any entity as a demon or an angel. That's their paradigm. It's one of those two usually. And I don't personally see it like that way. And so I was talking to a Christian like that, and he reached out to me much later, reaching to the very outer fringes of his religion to find an example to agree with me. And it's great and all that he's trying to relate. But when you have to reach to the outer fringes of your religion to a point where it's not even like acceptable, it's a little bit of an issue. And it shows the limitation of belief. Your structure has walls. Your structure goes from one wall to the other. And so if the answer is not in that box, you will not find the answer. And that's why I think boxing yourself into systems of thought is automatically destructive to your capability to think beyond yourself. And at the same time, I can completely understand why people would choose to live like this because the truth of the matter is the heavier your awareness becomes, the stronger your awareness becomes, the more crippling life is. It's very difficult to live with such a heavy level of awareness because at a certain point you start to see the crippling dissonance everywhere you go. A very maybe relatable, maybe not relatable example might ruin your life example. You watch a movie and you cannot get immersed into it because you see their actors. You look at politics and you see people arguing, oh, my side's right. No, my side's right. And you realize they're both wrong. There's no right side. They're both wrong. They're both evil. They're both corrupt. The fact that you even have to think about that to me is crazy, but I'm starting to realize why that's the case because people see one thing and one thing only. And so, well, the ability to see in this angle is really quite a beautiful thing to see in the truth. It's also very crippling because another example you could use is you go to watch a football game, right? And there's two teams. There's your home team and there's the visitor team. And when you look at it, you have no connection to the home team because you don't associate with your home identity as important. And so suddenly it's just two teams and you have no vested interest in a winner. And when there's no vested interest in a winner, the outcome is irrelevant. And the reason I even explain this stuff, because I inherently think your quality of life goes down when you know this stuff because you kind of lose your immersion into the world. I say this stuff because I think there's a select amount of people, probably more specifically the intuitives if you want to do a grouping, but I think a grouping is very limited. I think it's not perfectly accurate as a formulation, but my point is if you're one of those people who see more, you are going to be stuck in a couple places and you'll find yourself down the line going to places and I want to either stop you or help you because you'll hit a point where you realize that your awareness is becoming so strong that you're now strange, you're alienated, and people don't understand you. So you either stop or you keep going. And if you keep going, it's just going to get worse. You're going to be even more alienated and less understood by people. Or you can bow down and accept that delusion and dishonesty is a natural part of human experience. I personally can't go down that route just because for me, authenticity tops everything else. But it is a very real reality. You know, for example, someone will ask you, oh, how are you doing? And they expect you to say, oh, I'm doing good. But me, I would say, well, I'm not actually doing the best. This and this happened. And, you know, the people are like, what, why would you say that? Just answer good, you know? And they want you to lie. And I personally don't really believe in lying like that. So it's kind of one of those things where you don't have the social normalities that most people have where they say things out of falsities. You know, you go to the store, you walk out and they say, oh, have a great day, sir. And in your mind, you know for a fact, if they weren't getting paid and they weren't forced to say it, they would not. It's fake. It's performative, and performative to me is really quite sinister. I think there's really a weird thing about this. In my opinion, there is rewards for living in this awareness and this authenticity. I think you have a greater control of your reality. I think you have more freedom. I think you attract greater things in your life. So it's a give and take. It's a burden to carry the awareness, but it comes with its gifts. And whether you want to say those gifts are from divine matters, up to you. But I've noticed that the more I purify myself, the less weight I have in my soul, the closer I am to God, I would personally say. You look at the Egyptians. The Egyptians say they weigh your heart against a feather, meaning your heart has to be as light as a feather to not get your soul devoured. I know, a little vicious, but is it any more vicious than the Christians who are saying you're going to hell for eternity if you don't believe in Christ? I don't think so, personally. So, you know, religions in themselves have these fear tactics. I don't really buy them. I buy them in one sense only. Actually, I'm not going to say this for a fact. I have a multitude of beliefs on this. I believe that there's either reincarnation or if you don't successfully manage this life, your soul just gets evaporated back into God. I think that's probably the reality of it. And, you know, if you can do this life correct, you might become a divine being. I see God as the infinite energy. And, you know, to become a divine being, I say that as in people like Jesus. I think Jesus became divine out of pure understanding of these rules of reality and complete selflessness. You know, I think Jesus was so without identity that he forgave the people who pinned him on the cross because he was so selfless. It's very hard to do that. You cannot be doing that when you have an identity. A person stuck to their identity would think, why would they do this to me? All I have done was good. The person without identity would think, forgive them for what they have done. And it's the embodiment of the goodness, because once you remove the nature of the self, you become selfless. And to be selfless is to be good. To be selfish is to be evil. To be selfish is the self-identity. It's an ego, right? And so I guess here's really the proposal I have for you. Either you can keep going down the path of awareness and you have to hold a burden of this awareness that the majority of people will not understand you and they will not follow along with what you're saying. And you'll be completely alienated. You know, you will be alienated from your family. you'll be alienated from a lot of your friends. As time goes on, you'll run into people who understand what you're talking about. And I'm sure I'll get at least one comment who's going to say, oh, you're so egotistical because you're putting your truth over others. And I'm not putting my truth over others. I've educated myself on all the religions and all this stuff for a reason because I wanted to know the real truth. And I'm completely open to all religions. If someone can actually fundamentally prove to me that these other ones are right, then great. I'm fully open-minded to it. The issue is that they never really can, and they always resort to some shallow argument like, this is my least favorite ones, but I guarantee I'll hear it in the comments at least once on this channel. I hear it on the other channel all the time, but when I'll make an example and their counter argument is Jesus is king, it's not proving anything. And then circular sourcing as well is not helping the case either. Like, you reference your own book as evidence. It's not really good because anyone who does not follow your belief system sees your book as fictitious. I'm not saying that's inherently me, but most people you're going to argue with are inherently in that nature because they follow a different religion. So arguing with your own sources is kind of like a losing battle. It's kind of like saying I'm right because I'm right. It's not a good argument, but that's besides the point. I mean, if someone really has a good point to make in the comments, please write it out. I'd love to hear it. My least favorite thing to see is comments that disagree completely vaguely. On my last video, I had someone say this. I made a comment about how I think having intercourse before marriage is wrong. And their comment says, I don't think it is. What am I supposed to take from that? Prove to me one reason. Because in that last video, I even said there is not a single good thing that comes from it. And if they could point out a single good thing that comes from it, maybe I would have listened. But they had no example, and it just kind of proves my point. It's an egoic thing. They probably messed up their life in a certain way. They probably made bad decisions in that avenue. And so it's part of their identity. They made that choice, and so they'll defend their identity till the day they die. And that's the danger of being in the identity. And that's why I'm kind of under the teaching of forming the proper identity of the proper life you want. But this video is getting long, so thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.